You could say it's New Year, same impasse in France. After a Christmas lull, France's Yellow Vest protests again turning violent this past Saturday, with viral images of a protester boxing riot police in Paris, the battering of the gates of a government ministry, a houseboat restaurant on the Seine set alight, and more violence and destruction in several cities. Why the violence? How do you respond when it's a leaderless movement with no crowd control service, no clear organizer? An estimated 4,000 Yellow Vests turned out in Paris last Saturday, much more than the previous week, much less than the big protests of late November, early December. After government concessions on fuel taxes and other issues, what do those protesters want now? Demands are as disparate as political support, which ranges from the far right to the far left. On Wednesday, the government will be launching public hearings to list demands. A talk shop that'll flop? Or can dialogue herald a breakthrough in a France where we're now discovering that the decline of trade unions and political parties have perhaps left a vacuum between citizens and a young president who, to get elected, broke the old system and now finds himself, well, a little bit alone at the top. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at what the answer can be to the Yellow Vest movement. Joining us, he's a member of the French Parliament from Emmanuel Macron's La République En Marche party, Jacques-Marie Le Sion. Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us.
Happy New Year. Good evening.
Happy New Year to former member of the left-wing Unbowed France party, Georgic Kuzmanovic. How are you?
Great. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year as well to Nathalie Janson, who teaches at the Neoma Business School.
Hello. Happy New Year.
Thanks for joining us. From the University of Luxembourg, sociologist Louis Chauvel, the author of Louis. How do we translate this into English? The downward spiral of the middle class. How would you say it? Your book.
Happy New Year, Louis Chauvel. Hello.
Happy New Year to you. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Let's start with the latest. And that former light heavyweight boxer accused of assaulting two gendarmes on a Paris bridge during Saturday's riot, he handed himself in a taped message on YouTube. His name is Christophe Détinger. He admits to badly reacting, all the while insisting he was provoked by the heavy-handed tactics of riot police. Wassim Cornet has more.
It was another day of what has almost become routine in the French capital. Thousands of Yellow Vest protesters converging in Paris, expressing anger toward the government. Scuffles broke out close to the Musée d'Orsay, and then this happened. A man dressed in all black seen attacking riot police on a bridge over the River Seine. Video shot by an independent press agency shows the man punching a policeman repeatedly. A few minutes later, he is seen kicking a policeman who was already on the ground. Over the weekend, he was identified by multiple people on social media as Christophe Détinger, a 37-year-old former professional boxer who currently works for the maintenance department of a Paris suburb. In a 2.5-minute long video posted on Facebook, Détinger admits he was the man who attacked riot police. In it, he says he has taken part in every demonstration in Paris for the past 8 weeks. He also explains how this one ended differently.
I was tear-gassed. My wife and my friend were also tear-gassed. And at one point I became furious. And yes, I reacted badly, but I was defending myself.
At the end of the video, Détinger calls on the Yellow Vests to continue protesting peacefully. The government is taking the incident very seriously. Even before the man was identified, the Interior Minister said in a tweet that it would take the man to court.
The police prefecture has decided to press charges. I have utmost confidence in our justice system, and this man will have to face justice for this attack, which was both cowardly and intolerable.
On social media, though, Yellow Vests by the hundreds are calling Christophe Détinger a hero. A crowdfunding account set up by a family member to cover his legal fees has already raised several tens of thousands of euros. Protests by the Yellow Vest movement are expected to continue in the coming weeks.
Jacques-Marie Le Sion, your reaction, you heard in that taped message on social media, he said, I reacted badly, but I was defending myself.
What can we say? First of all, we are a country, France, that is at work. Okay? These things are happening only on Saturday, end of afternoon or evening, once the demonstration is almost finished. 6 days out of 7, France is at work. But every Saturday we have a movement. The mobilization is lower and lower if you accept the Christmas period. But you have according to my view, we have 3 kinds of people in these type of demonstrations. You have rioters who are here to destroy things. You have people who are extremists, far left or far right. And I would say you have a vast majority of true, sincere yellow vest people demonstrating, expressing their distress, expressing their difficulties of everyday life. And these people have to be listened to, and we have to dialogue with them. For the 2 first, the rioters and the extremists, far right or far left, we probably have something different to do. And this guy, I can't tell if he's from category 1, 2, or 3, but what he has done is unacceptable. I have been training with gendarme mobile, the guy who was kicked by this person, and I can tell you, they have orders not to react to aggressions. Okay, French police and French gendarmerie is well known in the entire world to have a huge experience of order, how to maintain order. In the French centers, you have visitors from over the world. Last 2 months ago, there was visitors from Spain. We had visitors from the US, from Germany, who are spending week of trainings with the French gendarmerie to maintain order. But in this case, the force has to cope with a new type of demonstration.
So he should face punishment.
Yes.
George Kuzmanovic, you agree that he should face punishment for?
Of course,
kicking
we all
that-
appreciate our police and gendarmerie.
Because you see on the videos, you see him
Citizens-
kicking up a riot policeman who's down.
Citizens should not attack their policemen, but come on, it's a guy who attacked one guy who attacked with a fist a completely heavily armored policeman.
He attacked 2.
And,
No.
and it's over and over on the medias. The same day, a commander of police was beating several people in Toulon, as you know.
No, not 7, 2.
Yes, at least 2 that was caught on video. I think from La République En Marche, there was one guy called Benalla who was disguised in policeman who was beating several people as disguised as a policeman. Is still not in jail.
So are you condoning?
This guy will go there.
Are you condemning this
Should he
violence?
face justice? Should he
I
face
like to-
justice?
Are you condemning?
Should he be tried?
Of course.
Yeah.
He has not to attack a policeman. That's okay. But this government, and especially Mr. Castaner, is using policemen. They are not guilty. They are used by the government to provoke in several times demonstrators. I've seen it for Act 7 in Bordeaux because I was there with my family. We walked peaceful in Bordeaux. Unfortunately, yes, sorry for the government, the city was packed with yellow vests, and they were there. And obviously, there was one guy who threw a bottle on policemen, and they started firing on everybody. One young woman student getting in the head. This reminds us that dozens of people in France have been injured by this weapon, shoot too close, too straight in the faces. You have photographies, and this is not acceptable neither. So, yeah, I think the government should also request not to provoke, and anyway, this will not stop this uprise of the people because he had huge roots.
Your reaction to the violence that we saw on Saturday?
I say that we all agree that someone who used violence need to be,
Condemned.
to be trialed. Yes, for what he did.
Louis Chauvel, it's not the first time that France has a long history of demonstrations that sometimes turn violent. Are these demonstrations different?
Yeah, indeed. It's different, but anyway, we are in the long range of a very strange situation of taste for violence in politics. Coming from Germany or from the UK, it's very difficult to understand how French people behave in the streets. Riots and this kind of repression by the police is relatively common in France, and it's not. We are not in a very strong situation today. I think that we can go progressively to stronger violence. Indeed, for the last 2 years, after the election of President Macron benefited from a kind of état de grâce,
Honeymoon period.
long 18 months of relative calm. Nowadays, we are facing a situation where people are more and more frustrated by the economic situation. Typically, we are facing a situation of discovery that growth is not forever. French level of unemployment is very high compared to Germany, to Northern Europe, and the UK, and so on. This means that people are frustrated. They are seeing a new situation of the recession is coming, and there is no public discourse of protection in front of that. This means that the situation is new because we don't see how this movement can finish.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be at this point in time a way to break the impasse. We're going to put that to our panel. But just one more word about the violence, because there was the leader of the Unbowed France party on Twitter on Saturday. He stated the following, Jean-Luc Mélenchon: hand-to-hand combat on the bridges of Paris. Is it a Republican power that's giving such orders? That drew this response from the government spokesperson whose ministry was the target of that construction site forklift that was used as a battering ram.
Un patron d'aucun parti
Not a single party leader stood up after the break-in and the other acts of violence towards our institutions. This shows a complete surrender of our moral and political values from many within the opposition. They're moving away from our principles. It's the spirit of Munich 1938. They're using the movement to win over the people's support. So to me, these leaders have left the field of Republican values.
The spirit of 1938, when the French and the British appeased Adolf Hitler, with the result that we all knew a year later.
I mean, is that serious?
Well,
Speaking of Hitler, people demonstrating in the street.
it is.
No, this is what we're saying.
I know you're no longer a member of that party, but
Yeah.
I need to ask you, what does that mean, that tweet? Hand-to-hand combat on the bridges of Paris. Is it a Republican power that's giving such orders? Is he blaming Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the police, for what's going on?
No, I heard first this tweet is not very clear, but I think that he's blaming the government.
Not the first one.
No, okay. Well, I'm not here to defend Jean-Luc Mélenchon, but I think he's blaming the government that is provoking. And I have to say that there is some provocations, and I'm sorry for Mr. Griveaux, but you have the unrest and the violence in the streets. Okay, we can focus on that.
But using a battering ram against a government ministry, what is your reaction to that?
Do you imagine the amount of social violence that brings people to do that? Maybe these guys. Okay, let's see the trial. Maybe these guys are far right activists or far left activists. It's fine.
Or rioters.
Trial them because they're rioters. They just want to. But what if, as many times with the people arrested, are people without any police record,
but
any attack, no member of anything? They just rioting. Let me explain. We have this country. We are listening by other countries. This country is special. France is making a revolution every 50 years. The last one was in 68. It was 50 years ago. So this is happening. The French Revolution, what would have said against the people who did the 14th of July? That brings our republic. We have also a problem in this country, and these are the very roots.
But you heard Louis Chauvel a moment ago say that this violence could get a lot worse.
Of course, because he's right. The roots of this revolt is strong. It's social, it's political, it's the poverty, and the reality of the numbers and the figures in France is 18.2 people that doesn't have any work, that jobless in this country. 1/5. If you count all,
No.
yes, that's the reality.
9%.
I mean, the people who cannot
9%.
live with their job is 1 on 5.
9%.
That's your figures that you modify like every government year after year. You're working on the figures, not on the real unemployment.
Are you surprised by the violence here, Nathalie Janson?
I'm an economist, so I'm not a specialist of the history of France, but for sure we have an history of violence when people do disagree with what is going on. So that's a surprise because it's getting worse. Yes, for sure. But it's true that in France we have more the use of violence than in other countries. If you compare with other countries like Greece or Italy, comparing the economic situation, for sure, it's much more violent.
But again, with the political parties weakened, with the trade unions weakened, it's a new kind of violence because we're dealing with, Jacques-Marie Lotion, a leaderless movement.
Yes, the challenge is there. There is nobody to talk to, right? You have thousands of yellow vest people and thousands of different claims, okay? Some of them are, of course, contradictory to each other's. So how can you negotiate? How can you discuss with these people? Because each and every is thinking different than the other.
So Louis Chauvel said he doesn't see a way out of this, what you're
Exactly.
describing. So what do you do?
Yes, there is a way out.
We mentioned one point. This is also a European phenomenon because if you see what has happened in other countries recently, for instance, even in Belgium, you can see that there is a sort of distress all over Europe in front of the way globalization is evolving and how emerging countries and immigration is threatening the peaceful Europe. So this is a phenomenon that is not just French. And if you say, you mentioned Jean-Luc Mélenchon, honestly, what he's saying days after days, tweet after tweets, is unacceptable. He believes that he is at the age or the eve of a revolution, right? And what he's saying is unacceptable. He is now on the dark side of the force because what he's saying is encouraging people to destroy things and to make a revolution. And the vast majority of French people, even yellow vest people, I discussed with them recently, they do not agree with that.
All right, Georgie, I have to cut you off because we have to go to the break. But we'll be right back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking at the impasse in France between the government and the Yellow Vests movement. We're doing so in the company of a member of the French Parliament, Jacques-Marie Lotion, of Emmanuel Macron's La République En Marche party, former member of the Unbowed France party, George Kuzmanovic, Nathalie Janson, who teaches at the Neoma Business School, and from the University of Luxembourg, Louis Chauvel is with us. Thank you for joining us from the Grand Duchy, distancing themselves from Saturday's violence, which we've been talking about in part one of our discussion. Women who are part of the Yellow Vest movement, they rallied on Sunday. Kathy Clifford has that story.
Looking to show a different side to France's Yellow Vest movement, the sex on the wrong side of the gender pay gap took to the streets of Paris.
I work as an assistant in a retirement home. I earn 1,075 euros a month. I work 12-hour shifts. I get no support. My son's on benefits and he's the one who helps me out at the end of the month so I can buy petrol and get to work, things like that.
Among the crowds, red caps associated with the French Revolution, a nod to the role of women in the march on the Palace of Versailles.
If we look back in history, the revolution began with women taking to the streets because they could no longer feed their children.
The sentiment still echoing today.
Sometimes we're forced to buy low-quality products just to be able to eat at the end of the month. I have a 2-year-old and I'm scared one day I won't be able to feed him.
Meanwhile, similar protests took place around the country. A recent study by Oxfam found that in France, women fill 70% of short-term contracts and 78% of part-time posts, despite a majority saying they'd like to work more.
It's women that are in the most precarious position, who struggle in part-time work, who often find their careers blocked when they become mothers. So women are at the front line, demanding equality.
Meanwhile, around 1 in 4 working single mothers are believed to be living below the poverty line.
You say you're not a historian, Nathalie Janson. You saw again those Phrygian caps, the references to the French Revolution.
Yes.
Your thoughts on what you heard from those women there?
Oh, that's true. That anyway, the women, given their position on the job market, they are fragile. They are fragile because they as they said, many of them said they have very often a part-time job because. Through sociological evolution, we know that there is a lot of divorce. So if women have in charge the children, they are most likely to have a part-time job. So for that very reason, it's true that having a part-time job and having to raise children is not an easy task, and you may fall very easily into poverty. And or very close to poverty. This is the paradox indeed of France. You have one of the most generous welfare state, and at the same time you have that situation, which is unique, as we could tell in Europe. Because we are not a typical case of a country where the gap between the rich and the poor is as big as in some other countries. So we do have a welfare state that is quite generous, but still we have lots of people who are out of that safety net.
So there still is a welfare system, Louis Chauvel, but it's the fear, the perception that it's going away.
Yeah.
It's not only a perception. I mean that.
Yeah,
you
it's
have
true.
a situation in France where we are living the end of a specific cycle of middle-class society. It's not the end of middle-class society today, but it's a situation where you have many declines in the status of the middle class. It's not only precariat is developing in France, it's also a question of level of living. For instance, 1 year of wage in Paris in the 1980s represented 9 square meters. With 1 year, you could buy 9 square meters. Today, it's 3 square meters.
For an apartment.
The wage earner middle class, you have a consciousness that there is something declining, and no money, no redistribution is no longer able to solve this problem of reduction of level of living in terms of housing, for instance. It's really a need of sense and of direction. The middle class, the lower middle class in France today has the impression that they are no longer in the center of the system. They are marginalized and they are the next ones to be skipped out. It's no longer the problem of unemployed people, it's a problem of middle class, lower middle class wage earners or facing a situation of socioeconomic decline in a very complicated political situation.
And what percentage? Louis Chauvel, what percentage of the population? What percentage are we talking?
And the population, indeed.
What percentage of the population are we talking about?
10%.
Indeed, what we see today is
15.
You have
40.
Yeah, we see violence in the streets. The movement, the Yellow Vest movement, should be less and less, how to say that, popular in the population. Anyway, you still have a majority to support to support the Yellow Vest movement. This means that nowadays frustration is reaching the level of the lower middle class and of the median of the income distribution. It's very new because in the past, this kind of support for violence was representing 25 to 30% of the population maximum. Now you have a kind of almost majority to support this kind of violent change, potentially.
55%, according to one poll survey that was published over the weekend. Jacques-Marie Lotion, that brings us to, at this Wednesday, there's going to be the start of these public hearings around France, what they call le grand débat, the grand debate that's supposed to take place. How is it going to work concretely? Will it really work? Will they, what's going to come out of it? Is it just going to be a talk shop?
No. People have tried to organize it in each and every city with the mayors. So people will be able to express their difficulties. And the paradox is there. If you look at the numbers, even if you don't believe in numbers, but if you look at the numbers, someone that is considered as poor today is twice richer than the same poor 25 or 30 years ago. The poor are twice richer than the poor 30 years ago. But it all started in 2008 with the crisis, and since the power of spending has not increased. Okay, so people have the feeling, the sensation that they are not getting richer for 10 years, and more than that.
It's not a sensation. They haven't gotten a raise.
Exactly,
in 10 years.
exactly, and sometimes, but globally. And the main challenge is that what we call constrained spendings. Okay, is increasing and increasing every year, and they have the feeling that what is remaining give them no liberty, and this is a challenge because the constrained spendings, electricity, transportation, housing, as you mentioned, have been increased tremendously. But Emmanuel Macron, during the campaign last year, and in the book he wrote, he was explaining faire plus pour ceux qui ont moins, do more for those who have less. He perfectly understood what was going on, and he has been trying.
But the perception is that he hasn't governed that way. Particularly, the issue that comes up a lot is the wealth tax, for instance, that was scrapped.
My feeling is perception is different than the reality, and the more you can do for these people is to give them a job.
Is this a good idea, this grand débat, these public hearings that are to take place?
Obviously, there is already a grand débat since the last 8 weeks in France. Macron just got it right now. But unfortunately, after what he said during his speech for the New Year's Eve, and after Mr. Le Maire, the Minister of Economy speech, nothing will change. They will continue. This is once again like this last 30 years of neoliberal political economies that is continued to imply. It's not the first one, it's just continuing. It will be the same. You didn't understood enough, my dear people. We will explain you once more. But I think the people is tired. And I completely disagree with you because the real numbers and that have been read by Obama in the White House are the work of Thomas Piketty, who showed that 10% of the income that was taken from the workers, people who have a salary, a wage, to the rich. And France is the first in the worldwide for the increase of the number of millionaire and billionaire, the increase of their income. It's the worldwide success of CAC 40 last year. See,
okay, so but concretely, what do you do when you have?
It is the cut. He cut the taxes on the rich people.
Okay, so if
he removed a tax. He removed a tax from Nicolas Sarkozy. That was obliging rich people to give some money to the state when they were sending it on the offshore countries.
You know why?
Even that he removed it.
You know why? ESF is a stupid tax.
The wealth tax.
Yeah, it brings 5 billion to the state.
Wealth tax, yes.
At the same time, there is less and less doctors, less and less hospitals, less and less policemen, less and less firemen. Our soldiers does not have the weapon they need in the wars. The state is fading, and there are people that is serving interests of a super class that is not interested at all with the national issues.
You just gave us examples. There are less and less doctors. The first measures that we have taken is to decide to get rid of the curses for medicines. The challenge is that our actions will benefit the French people in 10 years, because it takes 10 years to create a doctor, right? We had that limit of...
François Hollande said the same, Sarkozy said the same, Chirac said
we
the
have
same.
decided to get rid of that limit for doctors, and this will be done in 10 years. You mentioned soldiers. We are now increasing tremendously the budget of the army, right?
That's not right.
This is not true. You know.
It will be from 22 to 25.
No,
which means
it's
3 years after the end of
since the first budget 2 years ago, it has increased by 3.5 billion of euros, and it's increasing 1.7.
We're not in a traditional situation where you have.
You're lying. You're lying.
No, you're lying.
You're lying.
And Macron is lying, and
you're
people
lying.
are in the street.
The budget, the defense
something.
budget, has increased by 1.7 billion euros each and every year for the next 5 years.
Everybody said,
right or wrong?
Right or wrong? Wrong. Everybody
right or wrong?
Wrong.
You're lying.
No, you're
everybody
lying.
Everybody can verify. Everybody can verify.
Power, and what will you verify?
We have a problem. This is why we have a problem. These type of people, Mélenchon and others, are lying to people, and they are continuously lying to people.
All right, let's keep it civil and just talk about the issue of how do you now come up with answers that can move this forward. You're saying that there needs to be a better social safety net than there is currently, that there needs to be a rethink. What do you do, though, when the trade unions are weakened, when the political parties are weakened? How do you...
A tax reform.
Yes.
People are asking a tax reform, like it was asked before the French Revolution, which means taxing the rich.
Nathalie Janson.
I would not necessarily agree that it's taxing the rich, but a tax reform for sure. I guess that what I've been missing since almost 40 years in France is to have a clear debate on what you want to do with the government money, because this is what we are a perfect illustration of a government that have a large share in the economy, but as a matter of fact, it's too large. So if you want, you need to make choices, and that is what France has not done. So you can't achieve all the goals you think you will be achieving at the same time, because you are covering too many different objectives. And this is really the clear case of France, because if you look at it, we have the public school is not really working efficiently. We don't score very good on the test at the international level. We are producing students who are not achieving a good score. We are leaving out of the system many students, because what is a success is the private system, not the public one, because the public universities usually, when you end up in the public universities, you are not really finding a job. So you can see that many students today are choosing the private sector because they know that they will have a better placement. Obviously, it depends on the area, but if you are taking management, since I teach in a management school, you can clearly see that choice, and you can see that the population going to those schools are population coming from mainly average plus type of families, and they are not. It's because it's a clear choice of the parents.
Let me bring in Louis Chauvel, because Louis, you're in Luxembourg, so you've got a bit of the outsider's eye when it comes to. We talked earlier about the French stereotype of demonstrations being violent, but there's something else that's surprising for many of the foreign journalists who've been covering the Yellow Vest movement, and I've spoken to some of the Yellow Vests myself, how well they know tax law. It's something that's been quite surprising when you've spoken to them in demonstrations. They know the intricacies of tax laws. They know about the GAFAs, corporate tax rates. They can argue the points. And was that where Macron should have started, with a tax reform?
Indeed, the situation of France is very difficult to understand from Germany or from the UK or even Belgium. That is much closer case, indeed. The reality is that we have lost a lot of time over the last 2 years in France, with many reforms that had been, let's say, delayed and not so efficient in terms of visibility for real people. The problem we are facing in France, for instance, is that the argument of the government that the poor are much richer than 20 years ago is not a good argument to convince the population. I mean that there's some truth in terms of poor or richer, in terms of purchasing power, in terms of food or garments or that kind of thing. But in terms of good food, housing, whatever, the situation of the middle class in France is more and more problematic, and it's based on objective arguments. You can see the distortions that the middle class are facing. So the problem is less and less a question of truth than a question of capacity of dialogue between the government and some parts of the population. What the government says is the opposite of what people see in their everyday life. And in this context, the debate is almost impossible. It's impossible to debate of tax rates. It's impossible to debate of tax reforms in this context. What people need is sense and a vision of future. The reason why you have a strong support of the movement in France is that a large share of the population sees no future in the recent decisions of the government. And in this situation of lack of future, it will be really difficult to govern the French population.
So how do you change the dynamic?
I remind you that recession is coming. It's obvious. We have already early indicators of coming of economic slowdown. So cash scarcity is coming, and the French population, is a bit frightened by the lack of capacities of the government to answer those new challenges.
So how do you do it? How do you bring everyone around the table? How do you get a consensus for something that everybody can agree on? What should the government do, Louis Chauvel?
At first, the government needs a new diagnosis on the French situation that is much deeply. The French situation is deeply problematic in many respects: unemployment, housing, whatever. First, a diagnosis is needed, and the second need is to make sense of future, not let's say empty words. The problem of the government of many governments in France is that they are very good in short-term discourses, but when you want to build a vision of future, you have no one.
Jacques-Marie Le Sien, a tax reform, is that what's needed? Something that a bold announcement from the government on that? Is that what should be next?
What your invitee was explaining is very important. Probably where I can accept that we have not performed well is that probably we have not explained enough the sense and the vision of future to the people of what we were doing. Because believe me, we have been working to do a lot of new laws to transform France. As big an example, a lot of people are from, let's say, campaigns, territories, I would say in French. And what are they facing? They are facing transportation problems, or as simple as that, connectivity problems for 4G or for internet. What has been decided 18 months ago is to mobilize all the operators to change it. And we have today a huge plan of implementing 4G in each and every cities and territories, and another plan for implementing high-speed internet. Okay, and we have been preparing a big law now for mobility and transportation. The challenge is when you are preparing a law, it takes sometimes 12 or 18 months. The next law that is going on my desk is mobility law for transportation. Right? That the challenge is we have implemented and voted so many laws in the last 18 months that people have lost where they were going to.
All right, the need for the big picture. We're going to have to leave it there because we're running short on time. Jacques-Marie Le Sien, I want to thank. I want to thank Georges Korsmanovic. I want to thank as well Nathalie Janson, Louis Chauvel for being with us from Luxembourg. Stay with us. Media Watch is next.